Hello, I will be going over the movement skills and copy skills found in the typical Kirby game. The examples I am using will be from Kirby and the Amazing Mirror. Let's start by looking at all the buttons you need to worry about, which are just these: the A, B, and directional keys. This is Kirby in the default state. First, the player understands basic movement from their atoms. Starting with the mental model, you would expect Kirby to move to the left if the left arrow key is pressed. In-game, if you execute that action and press the left key, the simulation takes the input and moves Kirby's position toward that direction, if possible. The feedback that the player receives is that they see the screen updating Kirby's pixels some units to the left, and this validates the mental model once again, as the loop runs as long as the left key is pressed. There's a similar loop for Kirby's movement to the right, and also when crouching, the only difference being that Kirby becomes flattened on the ground and stays that way until the down key is released. Next is the jump skill. When the player presses the B key, the simulation looks at several conditions and the state of Kirby to determine if a jump is possible. If it is, a force is applied to Kirby upwards, and the player sees corresponding feedback visually. At the end, the model is updated as the player learns that Kirby is able to jump by pressing B on the ground. Within this loop, two possible things happen. One is that the player does not give any more input while Kirby is in the air, and the second is that they try to jump before Kirby lands on the ground. If the player does nothing but watch Kirby fall, then Kirby will enter a passive loop where gravity constantly applies a downward force. This is a simulation that is always happening and is most obvious when Kirby is in the air. Players understand this through the feedback of seeing Kirby moving downwards on the screen without any input, which in turn refreshes their mental model that Kirby will keep falling if no input is given, or they hit the ground. There is also another possibility that happens when Kirby falls, which is a transition that activates when the player sees Kirby touch the bottom of the screen. The simulation understands this as Kirby hitting a kill zone and deals fatal damage to Kirby. The feedback is a death animation, which teaches the player that when Kirby touches the bottom of the screen, Kirby dies. After Kirby dies, progress is reset and is returned to the start of the level. However, if we backtrack and reimagine that the player attempts to jump again in the air, the rules of the game put Kirby into a floating state and introduce a new loop where Kirby can keep pressing the B or up button to float infinitely in the air. This loop no longer works when Kirby exhales, which changes Kirby's state out of floating. Kirby cannot exhale again without floating again. After exiting the subloop, Kirby goes back to default and falls, or the subloop can be entered again when Kirby enters float state. For the copying skills, Kirby has the primary loop of inhaling, starting with the action of pressing A. The simulation will pull enemies toward Kirby's mouth, and the visual feedback updates the mental model to let players know that they can continuously inhale by holding A. After something is inhaled, Kirby becomes bigger and enters a hold state. In this state, some previous loops become unavailable, but some new actions open up. In particular, pressing A again will cause Kirby to release the consumed object, and pressing down will swallow it. Releasing exits this state and gives the complete feedback of an enemy being inhaled and released, which teaches the player of a larger loop where Kirby can consume and spit out enemies. The more important mechanic is swallowing, which also exits the hold state but can transform Kirby depending on the enemy that was consumed. Transformations start a new loop that changes how the game responds to the player's A key input. Since there are too many possible transformations, I've listed a very small portion here. For example, the first one is a loop that Kirby gains if a sword enemy was swallowed. This transformation gives a new loop which uses the A input as an action, and the simulation's rules see that since Kirby has transformed into Swordsman, it should perform sword attacks. Players see this feedback on their screen in the form of different attack animations, and repeating this reinforces the mental model that Kirby can perform sword skills after consuming a sword enemy. Taking damage while transformed exits this loop, but Kirby can inhale again and explore all the other loops that the game has to offer. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.